Hi guys. So today felt like a great day to come on and make this video and talk to you guys. Well, primarily because most of us are riding the high of the US elections outputs. And for me personally, because of the appointment of Kamala Harris. Just with one sweep, she's made history on 3 counts in terms of being a Black, Indian, and American woman to be the first woman vice president of the United States of America. Oh, so such a good day for gender balance and diversity and inclusion history. And I'm sure I'll remember this day for years to come. So today's topic is about positioning yourself effectively for optimal career growth. And now, while I'm sure that this is something that is equally applicable and will resonate with both men and women, I'm also conscious that there are perhaps more women out there who find this as an area of development and something that they find challenging. And I was made conscious of this when I did my Step Into Your Power video. So for those of you who haven't seen that, do check that out. When after that video, I had a whole bunch of women reached out to me and to thank me, to say that it really resonated with them, that this was something that they struggle with, and that the video really helped them reframe their thinking as well. And what ensued was a whole raft of deep, meaningful conversations that made me realize that some of the things that I have struggled with and overcome in my life are things that people are currently struggling with, and that would be really helpful if I could come on and share my journey and the things I did, in case it helps and inspires other people in their journeys. So as we approach year end, I'm sure that in most organizations it's performance management time, and I'm sure that men and women equally are groaning at the thought of talking about themselves and writing about themselves and speaking about themselves and filling in the year-end forms to go through this performance evaluation process. So it feels like a good time to share some of my lessons in this area, but a few housekeeping rules before I start, right? So the first thing is there is a time and place to talk about yourself, and you need to be really mindful of that. So so self-promotion should be a very mindful and respectful activity where you honor and respect yourself, but you also honor and respect another person. The second ground rule for me is that this video is not in any way, shape, or form suggesting that you do very little and talk about it a lot. So I get so frustrated when I come across those scenarios. And I don't think it's a great strategy. I think it's a very short-lived strategy to do that, that people wisen up to it very quickly, especially in today's day and age where there's so few barriers to communication. People are not going to be able to hold up their smoke and mirrors for too long. So don't do that. And the final thing is that the concepts in this video, even though they're pitched primarily at employees of organizations, and when you're an employee and going through the performance evaluation process, I think the concepts are equally applicable to, sorry, my voice. Yeah, concepts are equally applicable to those in the entrepreneurial space. So if you're a startup and you struggle to pitch and promote your idea, this will be equally applicable to you. So remember, it doesn't matter if you have $1 million idea. If you aren't able to pitch it effectively, and if you aren't able to sell yourself, it's very unlikely that an angel investor or an investor will be willing to invest in making sure that your idea becomes a reality. So there's that. Okay, so to start, just so that you know where I'm coming from with this, I was not always this person who thought that effective and mindful self-promotion was important. In fact, in the earlier days of my earlier parts of my career, I absolutely despised networking with a passion. I hated talking about myself, as you guys know if you've watched my previous videos, and I think it was something to do with there's this connotation that if you network, if you talk about yourself within the organization, it's a bit kiss ass, or to put it politely, kissing backsides. And therefore, it was never something that I wanted to do as a result. The only reason and the only way I changed my mind is when I realized that actually the intent matters. And if you do, so when you approach networking with a mindset of, I'm doing this to establish genuine human connections, I'm doing this to get to a good outcome, not just for myself, but for the other person and the organization at large, it really changes the way you approach it and it feels so much better. So the tip there, if most of you have this mindset, is to really reframe some of these activities and make sure that it fits with your values when you're doing it, and then you'll be fine. Just try it, and it makes a complete difference if you reframe and do it in the way that it suits you. But the most critical flip in mindset for me was actually brought about by the first time that I managed another individual. And I realized how difficult it was to keep track of everything that a person does over the year. Unless you're, unless you're the sort of person to A, micromanage your staff, or B, you have an elephant's memory, right? So for those of you who know me, you know that I'm neither of those two. I'm the sort of person who's like a strong believer in the only way that I keep my brain, whirring and working at peak performance is by periodically doing emptying my brain of information so that I can welcome and ingest new information. And in this day and age, when everyone is bombarded with information, emails, notices, communications, and all of that, their phones, I think it's really important to recognize that attention and memory are two really valuable resources and things that people struggle with. So if you can barely actually, let me rephrase that. So every year at year ends, I do this exercise, and it always amazes me at the outputs of this exercise, right? So I sit down before I write my performance evaluation forms and submit it. I sit down with a pen and paper, and I try to think of, from memory, Pavi, what do you think you've done in the last year? What are your key achievements? And more often than not, I'll remember like 5 to 10 things, which are against each, across my different objectives. And then I do this exercise of going through my emails month by month, because they're often very telltale signs of what you did do and the discussions we were involved in. And it always amazes me, and I'm always so flabbergasted at how much I've done over the course of the year. And what's more important, how very little I remember of what I've done. So if you can barely remember, or if a person can barely remember what they did over the course of 1 year, what are the chances that as a manager looking after or evaluating someone's performance, that they will A, know what you've done over the course of the year, or B, remember what you've done over the course of the year, right? So you need to bear that in mind when you're doing your performance evaluations. The other bit is that you need to recognize that performance decisions and promotion decisions, pay decisions, bonus decisions, they're a function of your assessment and articulation of your performance and your successes, then your manager's assessment and articulation of your successes, and their ability to represent you in a fair way at these promotion panels or calibration panels. And then number 3, the one that people often forget is, and actually a very important aspect, is how well you're perceived within the organization. So remember that unless you're in a position of leadership, a senior leadership within an organization, promotion decisions and bonus decisions are usually taken by people who are at least 2 to 4 rungs removed from you. In terms of hierarchy and within the organization. So essentially, what it comes down to is that you're stuck in this position where you can barely remember what you did over the last 1 year. Your line manager can barely remember what you did in the last 1 year. And then a bunch of people who don't even know you, because maybe you haven't networked effectively or because they haven't worked with you, who haven't seen the outcome of your work, are then having to compare you with other people within your organization at your peer level and make these decisions around progression and bonuses and pay. So if they're confronted, if you think about this logically, and I always do this in my head, so if they're confronted with 3 candidates, right, and all these candidates are amazing, okay, let's assume that in terms of capability, in terms of achievements, in terms of successes, they're all equal, more or less. But candidate A is a known figure, so they've done the work in terms of networking, they're well perceived within the organization among senior leadership. Candidate B hasn't done that networking, people don't really know them, but they've taken the effort to actually document in a really great way and clearly articulate what they've done in the past year in a way that can't be ignored. And then candidate C, who's great, but not well known and hasn't taken the effort, or maybe doesn't want to, feels awkward about documenting their achievements in the year-end panels, or think it's a waste of time. Now, what are the chances when you're sitting in front of, when this panel of people who don't know you potentially have to judge these 3 candidates? Candidate C is definitely out of the game, right? Because there's nothing to base their decisions on. There might be a bit, depending on your organization and how structured and fair some of these decision-making processes are, and how the different rounds of calibrations that happen, there might be a little bit of a tussle between candidate A and B, but the odds are in favor of candidate A, who's great, who's documented their performance evaluation stuff really well, and who's well perceived within the organization, right? So it's in their favor, but you could, by doing the bits in your performance evaluation, you do still stand a fairly good chance. So what this really showed me, or what this really helped me understand in my mind, is that there's 2 really key elements. The first bit is making sure that your year-end captures all of your successes, all of your achievements in a way that makes it really easy for people to recognize what you've done in an irrefutable way. And then the other bit is the working on positioning yourself well within the organization, right? So with that in mind, with that as your context, when people come to me for career advice on how to manage their career and how to progress within the organization, I always try to break it down in terms of 3 steps. And this is what I will try and share with you today. So step 1, articulate and document your achievements, right? We've talked about this. This will make your line manager's role extremely easy when they have to present your case to the promotion panels. And this is not just a great exercise of, just from a year-end perspective or for your line manager. I also personally love it because it's an amazing morale booster, right? I'm always on a high, having done and documented my full list of achievements for the year, because I can always look back and say, hey, check me out. Personally, I can, to myself, to nobody else, I can say, oh my goodness, puppy, you have, that's, pat on the back, job well done. Amazing list of achievements over the 1 year. You tend to forget very easily, right? So it's a good exercise to feel the sort of gratitude of the year that you've had from a year-end position. So that's step 1, right? So clearly articulating and documenting your achievements in your year-end, your performance evaluations, or whatever you call it in your organization. Now, step 2 is to convey that message, not just to your line manager, but to the people who are going to be involved in the promotion decision making. Now, this may involve or take the shape of putting some time in senior stakeholders' diaries as well ahead of year ends, is what I would say. So say mid-year, right? So if you're thinking about going for promotion at the end of the year, I would usually start thinking about this at least 6 to 8 months ahead, and then have these conversations in around mid-year, letting people know, hey, I think I'm ready for promotion this year, and I've put together a case of why I think I'm ready, and I'd like your thoughts on this. So this has, I think, for me personally, it's worked really well, because it has the twofold effect of, first, gently letting them know that this is something that they're thinking about. So when they're thinking about who to push forward for the next year, they have you in their mind. And then the second bit is that you'll get an honest opinion of what your chances are, right? You'll get an honest opinion whether or not they think you got a shot this year or whether you need to work for the thing next year. And they'll also always give you feedback on why they think so or what the gaps in your case are. So when they point that out to you, then in my mind, well, that's great, because now I know what I need to work on in a concrete way over the next 6 months to a year, so that when I do position myself for promotion, I would have plugged in all those gaps, right? So that's step 2, conveying that message to the senior stakeholders. Now, step 3, the one that I talked about earlier, is about building your network within the organization. Now, there are a gazillion strategies for networking, and it's a skill that I myself personally am continuously working on because of my personality type tends to be sometimes very reserved and quite introverted on and off. So I have a couple of strategies for you that I can offer you based on my own personal experiences and what worked for me. You can choose from these based on the time you have, whichever feels more comfortable for you. But if these don't work for you, there's a gazillion others out there. So feel free to pick one. But the idea is, please do spend time and effort building your network and your perception within the organization, because it's really important. Now, for me personally, there are 2 ways to do this. So there's the, I'm just gonna have a sip of my tea. So there's the direct networking aspect, and then there's the indirect networking aspect. So direct networking would be, or building your reputation would be, reaching out to a person cold, or maybe during an event, establish a common ground, build up a little bit of rapport, and then tell them a little bit about yourself and set up a time and channel to take that chat further. Now, if you're able to do this, this is an amazing skill, right? And I love, and I've seen some people pull this off so effortlessly, not being awkward at all. So it is something that I'm continuously working on, and it's really crucial that even if you're not comfortable with it, you continuously work on yourself. The challenge that I usually face with this specific approach, both for me in my earlier parts of my career, as well as the challenges that people bring to me when I suggest this, are things like, well, I'm not entirely comfortable doing that. What value would I add to senior stakeholders? I wouldn't know what to say. I don't think they'll have time for me, la-di-da. Well, I don't think they'll have time for me. In my experience, if I'm stretched personally for time, and someone comes up or approaches me, I'll either straight up but very respectfully say, I'm really sorry, I don't have the time right now, but maybe come back and speak to me in 6 months. Or actually, I can't help you, but I know that so-and-so is another great resource that you can fall on. Why don't you go speak to them? So I myself have been turned down in my organization by plenty of senior leaders who are approached to say, hey, I'd like, have a bit of a chat. Can you be my mentor? And people have very politely said, I'm sorry, I don't have the time, right? And I take that as, hey, at least I tried. So there's absolutely no lost, because their time is their resource and they can spend it as they like. And also, there's no opportunity loss. I'd much rather have tried and failed than not having tried at all, right? So that's they might not have the time aspect. If you don't ask, you'll never know. With the I'm not comfortable factor, now, the only thing I would say about this is that no one, absolutely no one, likes stepping out of their comfort zone. So even though you don't like stepping out of your comfort zone, outside of your comfort zone is where the magic happens, right? So to overcome this, there are 2 approaches you could take. Take the incremental baby step forays outside your comfort zone and then run back in. It's like dipping your dipping your toe in cold water before you put your full leg in, right? So this is the same sort of approach you can take. So I have a story. So one of my mentees said she was uncomfortable with public speaking on topics outside of her core work. So in discussions, we got her to commit herself to hosting a series of diversity and inclusion sessions and calls with a few people, so that she can get used to talking to a small group of people outside of her area of work. It was my delight to hear on my second mentoring session with her that she had now, since the last time we spoke, hosted 2 to 3 of these diversity and inclusion calls. And she felt that she was very comfortable doing them now. However, her concern was that in doing these calls, it was taking her a week to prep for it, and she wanted to get to a place where it took very little effort and she was comfortable doing it with very little time to prepare. So the next task I set for her was to host the next one, just with only 4 days of time to prepare, and then move that to 3, and then to move that to 2. So continuously and with baby steps, stepping outside and pushing herself to be outside her comfort zone. So the benefit of this approach, the approach of incremental steps of pushing yourself outside your comfort zone, is that you'll eventually get to your end goal, right? And you'll get there in a very sustainable fashion. The cons of this approach is that the incremental nature of that progression often makes it hard for the people doing it to recognize that they have been making progress. So while it was evident for me and was very delightful for me to recognize that she had taken this positive leap, she didn't think too much of it, and she still thought she hadn't done enough, or that she had a way to go. So just bear that in mind when you're thinking about this approach. Make sure that you acknowledge the baby steps that you're taking, so that you keep going in that direction. The second approach about and the one that I often take, my personal favorite, is the whole take a deep breath and rip the band-aid off, or dive into the deep end. And with this, you'll either learn to swim or you'll sink. The benefit of this for me personally is that it's very empowering for me when I do this, and I have this exhilarating feeling of accomplishment when I learn to swim, or when I've dived into it and come out of it safe and well. But recognizing that there are cons to this approach, and that is that, well, you could potentially sink. And if you are the sort of person who works well under high pressure and can quickly sort of adapt and pivot your stance based on the circumstances, this approach could completely undermine your confidence. So whichever one you take, just know thyself. Choose the approach which will work for you, and that is the safest way for you to go in a way that you'll get success. So that's what I would say about that. So back to direct networking. So a smart approach to direct networking, which I've seen people use very effectively, especially on me, and I've often thought to myself, like, hang on, this is a great strategy. Maybe I should try and use this more, is when you approach senior leaders and you ask them to be your mentor. I've had many people approach me in this way, and I often don't know them at all. But because I'm invested in people development, I say, yeah, sure. Half an hour once every 6 weeks is not a great commitment of my time, and I'm happy to do that. And in the course of this mentoring journey, I get to know them a little bit, even though they're completely outside of my areas of working. And I'm always pleasantly surprised at, when I interact with the insides of their brain, and over time how the rapport builds. And often my, because of this rapport, my investment in their career builds as well. And, I'm happy to help them out in terms of references or letters of recommendation or support with job interviews, or, a couple of times, if there was a position open within my organization, or my area of work within the company, I would reach out to one of my mentees and say, hey, I thought you'd be great for this. Do you want to apply? So that really sometimes opens up avenues for, to establish your wider network within the organization, but also to build presence amongst leaders that you wouldn't traditionally be involved in otherwise. So those are the two practical ways that I would approach direct networking. So let's go on to the second approach to networking, and that's indirect networking. Now, this is something that I personally tend to use a lot more, and this approach really works well for me because it takes and it entails taking part, championing, or directing activities that you are passionate about. So I'm a people person, and my commitment to an organization is often not just a function of the remuneration that I receive and the job at hand, but also the organization's stance on and progress on different and varying issues that I am passionate about. So things like gender balance, diversity and inclusion, corporate sustainability, and other sort of employee resource groups. So my approach to indirect networking is to partake in initiatives that help me meet people who have similar interests and build my network in that way. So, for example, in my organization in the last year, I signed up to be an innovation champion and a part of the my functions people forum, because innovation and people development are things that I'm passionate about. So through these initiatives, what happens is that I get to meet people across my function, on my wider function, who I don't traditionally interact with. And I'm able to observe in these interactions, in these initiatives, well, who are the ones who take leadership? Who are the ones who take initiative? Who are the people who take actions and see them end to end? Who shows leadership and all of that. So this, therefore, then helps me formulate in my mind an own opinion of who I'd be happy to work with in the future, who I'd be happy to hire or recommend for a job within my area. And equally, I've had the opportunity to meet and mingle with senior stakeholders who I wouldn't have otherwise, but in a very non-work capacity for something good we're trying to achieve for the organization. So I would know from these initiatives if I'd like to work for them in the future as well. So that, for me, is my little trick, which I tend to use quite a bit, because for me, it's the getting two birds with one stone strategy. I unfortunately have very little time outside my immensely hectic day job. So it gives me the greatest pleasure when I'm able to use my spare time to make an impact doing the things that I love, but at the same time, meet people who have similar interests, who will recognize talent, my talent, and whose talent I will recognize and then develop that network within the organization. So these are my key steps for effectively managing your career progression. So if I were to summarize, step one, articulate your outcomes, your successes, your achievements for the year. Step two, communicate that to your line manager and people involved in decision making. Step three, always make an active effort to build your network and your perception within the organization. You can do this through the direct approach, or you can do it through the indirect approach, whichever works for you. So there are obviously 100 different ways of achieving similar outcomes. But I've just tried to talk through some of my tried and tested approaches for you. So, key takeaway. If you can't talk about your achievements, do not expect other people to champion your cause and to talk about you and to put you on the path of success. You need to own that before you can expect somebody else to do that for you. Make their lives easy for them to be able to support you and to take good decisions, where they have all the facts in front of them to walk into a room and say, you know what, so-and-so or Pavitra Susan Prakash is the bee's knees, and you know why? Because of X, Y, Z, A, B, C. Some of these promotion decisions, some of these bonus decisions, they're so close with so many people involved. Personal bias is often involved. So the more irrefutable evidence you are able to give and provide someone to make a rational decision, the easier that decision-making process and the fairer that decision-making process is going to be. People like RBG and Kamala Harris or Jacinda or Obama or Sundar Pichai or Richard Branson didn't get to where they are by being a wallflower and waiting for someone to tell the world why they are good. They championed themselves first and then took people on that journey with them. So I conclude this little chat with the fervent wish that in our lifetimes we see 100 Kamala Harrises, 100 Ruth Bader Ginsburgs, because men and women out there, especially our wives, our sisters, our fathers, our daughters, our mothers, are able to talk about themselves in the most effective ways possible, so that who they are, just naturally who they are, can come out and shine in all their glory, and they can take their place in the world stage as they should be. Thank you. And if you haven't already, the usual, like, subscribe, and let me know how you found this video and if there was anything you'd like to talk about further.